All right, guys, welcome to learning to read and write to files. And for that, I have an example that I really enjoy that's going to add a little bit of complexity to this. So, this is a short story called The Library of Babel by Jorge Luis Borges, who's an Argentinian author from the mid 20th century. He wrote some incredibly interesting stuff, and this is a piece of his that I find really compelling. So this is a story about a person who finds themselves in an infinite library made of hexagons, and in each hexagon there are bookshelves, and on the bookshelves are books, and in each book is a whole bunch of random characters. So there's a whole world to be had here. There's a whole interesting thing about the library and about the librarian, and that's not really relevant to what I'm doing today. But I do encourage you to read this book. So I've got a URL here that you can copy down, and you can go read this. There's also this website that someone built based on the short story. You'll notice here it says it's variation of 23 letters. That's because Borges was a Spanish speaker, and he essentially took the Spanish alphabet and then dumped a bunch of double characters and dumped the Nye and came up with what he thought were 23 necessary letters. I'm going to present this to you the same way it's presented on the website, which is the 26 English letters, also commas, periods, and spaces. So let's go look at a random book. So we just click here, takes us to a random book. Here we can go to a random page. Not sure why I'm not getting a random page. But here, let's pick a random number. Let's go to page 65. So here is the contents of one of these books. So these books are, a page is 40 lines, a line is 80 characters, and there are 410 pages in the book. Our goal today is going to be to make a thing that generates a random book and stores it in a text file, and then reads that text file back and dumps it in the console for us. So to that end, I have here a basically blank Java project. So as we can see, our compiler or our IDE is working. We're getting file input output written down. You will very often see this abbreviated as file IO. Capital I, capital O is basic shorthand for input output. So what we're going to do is we're going to accomplish 3 tasks, and I'm going to put each of those 3 tasks into a separate method. So our first method that we're going to write is going to generate a book. And our book is going to be a random book. And then we're going to write our random book to a file. And then we're going to read our random book. Actually, let's just say we're going to read our file and print the contents in the console. Oops, console. Okay, that's going to be our 3 tasks today. So to that end, I'm going to, in here, make 3 methods. So my first method is going to be a public static string method. So we're going to return a string, and we're going to call this one generate book. Actually, you know what the hell? Let's call it generate random book. And this function, or this method, is going to take 3 arguments here. Right now it's whining that it doesn't have a return statement. So someplace down here at the bottom, we're going to need to return something, and we're going to return essentially a string called book. I'm going to make that here. If you skip a ways ahead in this video, you will notice that making a string called book here was a mistake, but that's okay. I'll talk through it. We're going to start using a string called book. We'll see that things are basically okay, and then we'll have to make some efficiency improvements. When we generate a book, I'm going to take 2 integers. Those integers are going to be essentially the size of the book. So I'm going to take an integer that's going to be characters per line, and another integer that's going to be lines per book. And this would be a great place to overload some methods. So I'm going to create this one first, but we should probably overload this thing. Some things to overload here would be to create the same thing, except don't take the integers. Just set them by default to what they are in the library. In the library, there are 80 characters per line and 16,400 characters per book. So we could, I guess, write some of that here. So here we'd take these two, and we'd be like, okay, we're going to set this one to 80, and we're going to set this one to 16,400. And then actually all we're going to do in this is we're going to call generate random book on those things. That's how we'd overload this. Right now, I'm not going to do this, but that would be our kind of way to do this. Actually, we could probably slim this out a little bit, and we'd want to return the result. Okay. I guess I said I wasn't going to do that, and then I did it. We'll uncomment that later. The other option that might be a good idea to overload would be to overload it with some kind of an alphabet. I'm going to set my alphabet right now. But we could load it with a different alphabet later. That would be another viable thing to overload. So right here, I'm making my empty book. I'm going to need a couple other things. I'm going to need, actually, I'm going to put these up above. I'm going to need some randomness. So I'm going to make a random that I'm going to call random, and it's going to be a new random. That's just so I can get random numbers. We could probably do something smarter here too, like we could multi-thread this or something, but I'm not going to. And then I also want a string that I'm going to call possible characters. That's going to be essentially my alphabet. And so this is going to include A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, comma, period, and space. Okay. So then our next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a couple of for loops. So this is going to be for the number of lines in the book. So the way I'm going to do that is we're going to do a for loop, and our for loop's going to be for an integer, and I'm going to call my integer line number. You can call it I if you want, but I'm going to call it line number so it makes sense to me what it actually is. So it's starting at 0. We're doing line number is going to be less than or equal to the lines per book. And it's going to go up by 1 every time we go through the loop. And then this is going to be for each character on the line. So that's going to be for an integer that I'm going to call character number, creatively enough. And we're going to start that at 0 as well. And we're going to go as long as character number is less than characters per line. And we're going to go up by 1 with that one as well. So essentially we're going line by line, character by character, right? So for the first time I'm going to be on the 0 line, and I'm going to start at the 0 character. I'm going to generate a random character, and I'm going to drop it in there. and then I'm going to scoot over one character and I'm going to drop a new character in there. And then I'm going to scoot over a new character and drop a character in there. And then when I get to the end of the line, I need to put a return to bring me down to the bottom of the first line, and then we'll go through the first line, right? 0th line, then first line. So after we get done with a line, we need to add a return to the end of the line. And that's going to be, we're going to take book and we're going to add a new line character at the end. And in here, we need to add our random character. So in order to do that, I'm going to make an integer that I'm going to call random index, which is just going to tell me which of these characters to grab. So my random index is going to be, I need to grab random, and I want to do next int. So that's going to give me a pseudo-random anyway, integer that I'm going to store in random index. And then we're going to do book plus equals. So we're going to add to the book. And the thing we're going to add to the book is going to be the possible characters dot character at random index. So what that's doing is that's saying, pick a random spot in this string, grab the character from that spot, and stick it onto the book. Does that make sense? So we're going to do that a whole bunch of times. Then when we reach the end of the line, we're going to add a carriage return, and then we're going to come back up and we're going to do it again, and then we're going to add a return, and then we're going to do it again, and then we're going to add a return, and we're going to do it again, and then we're going to add a return, and then eventually we'll reach the number of lines in the book, and we'll stop. Okay, so that's going to return a book. So let's check and see if that works. So let's do a system out. Cool shortcut, if you type S out, you can just tab complete to this. And the tab, and then the thing I want to print is going to be a book, but I need to get that by doing generate random book. And then I need to tell it how many characters and lines. So I'm going to have it generate with something I can count. So I'm going to go with 6 characters and 5 lines. And then we're printing it out. This is not what we want to do ultimately, but this is kind of a thing. Okay, great. I got a problem with okay, exception in thread. Index is out of bounds. Oh, because I just said dot next int, I didn't give it a bound. So the bound I need to give it is going to be the length of our possible characters. Okay, cool, good. Now we're going to hit run. Great. So let's see. That is 6 characters there. That's 6 characters there. That's 6 characters. That's 6 characters. That one looks like 4 characters, but 2 of those characters are spaces. So that is indeed 6 characters. Okay, great. That works. Now, next thing next. Here. So I'm writing this above just so you can see it. This is probably the wrong order to write these methods in, but it's what I'm doing. So I'm going to make another public static method. And this one's going to be a void method. It's not going to return anything because all it's going to do is take a string and write it to a file. So I'm going to call this write book. And it's going to take a string. I guess we need to write what the string is. So this is going to be the contents. Okay, now this is the part that's maybe new. Like everything up to here is a little weird, but it's not actually new content to the class. So this is a part that's new. So in order to write to a file, what you want is you want a file stream and a buffer. So you don't have to use a buffer, but you probably ought to. If we did this without the buffer, writing to the file would take a really long time. So the buffers make writing easier. If you just write using a file writer, it'll take and open up the writing process and write each character one at a time to the disk, which takes forever. So like it basically has to spool the disk up and then write a character, and then it spools the disk up and writes a character. And what we want to do is put all that shit in RAM And then once it's in the RAM, we'll just write it all at once. So that's what a buffered writer or a buffered reader does. So the way we're going to make that is we're going to do this with what's called a try with resources. So we're going to write to a file using a buffered writer and a try with resources. So try with resources is a nice convenient thing. It takes care of opening and closing files for us. So it's not gonna, like, we're not going to be able to forget to write to the file. This is going to do it automatically. So we're going to use a try here, and here the try gets some parentheses, and these are the resources. So here I'm going to use a buffered writer that I'm going to call writer. And this is going to be a new buffered writer based on a new file writer. And the file writer needs a file name. So I'm going to give it a name, and the name I'm giving it is book.txt. And now there's going to be a couple of issues that are going to continue to show up here. So you'll see that this is raising an issue. It's telling me there's an unhandled exception here. What that means is I need to try to catch that exception. So let's try to catch. And the thing we're going to catch is we're going to catch an IO exception. So IO is, again, input output. I'm going to call that exception exception. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't care. And then what I'm going to do with it right now is going to be really simple. I'm just going to say that what we want to do with our exception is we want to print out the stack trace for our exception. And then we want to, actually, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to put one more thing there in a second. Yeah, I'm going to put one more thing there in a second, but for right now, I'm going to leave it. So this guy creates a buffered writer object called writer, and that buffered writer object is based on a file writer. So the buffered part is about RAM. So we're putting this into the RAM instead of writing it to the hard drive. So this is saying, make ready to write to the hard drive, but let's start by putting it in the RAM. This is going to be an efficiency improvement. We could do it with just a straight writer. It would work. We shouldn't do it with a straight writer because it'll take forever. In this case, with our 6-character, 5-line book, that's 30 total characters. Well, okay, it's a bit more. It's 36 total characters because there's a carriage return at the end of each one. But it's 36 characters. It's going to be written instantaneously whether we do it with a writer or not, or with a buffered writer or not. But when we're writing a full book, we'll want that buffered writer. It will make a significant improvement. I did a little experiment a couple of minutes ago, and it took fully 2 minutes longer to do this with the regular file writer. Okay, so here, what I want to do is I want to do writer.write, and all I need to pass it is the string. So right now I don't actually have a string because I didn't save it. So I need to go up here. I'm going to call this book. Actually, you know what? I'm going to call it contents. And that's right here. That's my string that I'm getting passed as I call this method. This method right now isn't getting called. So let's establish that we need to call that method. So we're going to call writeBook. And we need to write it on some contents. So I want to write my string called book. But book, remember, exists in this method. So I need to get that book back. So what I'm going to do is instead of printing this out, I'm going to do, let's make a string that we're going to call book. It's going to be the result of calling the generate random book method. And then we're going to write that book. Okay. Now, right now when I hit run, I'm going to see nothing print in here, but I did see a book.txt file get created. There's the book.txt file. So notice the first line of this book is Knsack. Now, if I run this again, the first line of the book is not Knsack anymore. It's something else. And I am not even going to try to pronounce that. So be aware that when you write to a file, there are no checks, there are no balances, there's no, do you want to do that? There's no, hey, that file doesn't exist. There's no safeguards on this thing. This thing is letting you write directly to a file. If that file doesn't exist, it'll create it. If it does exist, it'll go ahead and overwrite it. So if you had something important saved in here, something important, and we run this, it's gone. That just fully overwrote that file. So be aware, like major warning here. Oops, wrong character. So this will overwrite a file without warning or asking. I'm just going to call it asking. So be aware. This will very happily overwrite a file. Now, I would like to know that that file was successfully printed to. So I want to do something like this. I want to put a system out, and I want to print that this happened. So I want to print something like success. The file, actually, in this case, the book was written to a file. You know what? Let's keep some exclamation points in there. Let's be excited about that. Now, the issue with this is that this right now is in the wrong ass block. I should have put that in the try block. Even here, there's a problem. So here, what's going on is this is going to set up to write the contents. It doesn't actually write the contents until the try block ends. So it puts this into the RAM. Don't worry, this would still happen with a file writer. But it puts it into the RAM or onto the hard drive, and then it doesn't close the file until the very end. So it's going to write out success, and then it's going to try to close the file. When it tries to close the file, it may discover that it doesn't have permission to save to that file or something. That's going to throw an input-output exception, and then we're going to get our error. Now, the issue is we'll have printed success first. So what we want to do is we want to take this out of here. We don't want to put it in the try block. We don't want to put it in the catch block. We want to put it afterwards. But now, if the catch happens, this will still print out. So what we want to do is we want to throw in here a return statement. So that's going to kick us out of this method. So if there's an exception, we'll print the stack trace, and then we'll stop doing this book writing method. We'll go back to main. That means, since we're going to leave, we're never going to get to printing out the success line. That's the safe way to ensure that we've actually told the truth with this print line. Okay, cool. Next thing. Let's read our file and put the contents in the console. So, in order to do that, we're going to make another method, and we're going to call this readBook. Okay, so now we need to write a method called readBook. So I'm going to very much copy this method. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and copy and paste this entire ass method. And now what we're going to do is we're going to call this readBook, and then we're going to change some things. So we're not writing to a file. We're reading from a file. So we're going to change our comment. And we're not going to use a buffered writer. We're going to use a buffered reader. Oops. And the buffered reader is mostly going to be for speed. And we're going to use our try with resources again. And we're going to swap this to a buffered reader. And we're going to call that reader. And here we're going to switch this to a reader. And this is going to be a file reader. And then here, we can't do writer.write contents. We want to do, this is going to this is going to be just a touch different because what we're going to do is we're going to read our file line by line so we can print it. So in order to read it line by line, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a string that I'm going to call line that's going to start out as reader.readline. Okay, we could read in the contents all at once, but I find it usually easier to deal with files a line at a time. If you want to read in the whole last thing, you absolutely can. The only thing with that here will be that our books are going to be quite long, and we'll have both put the book before we wrote it into the RAM, and then we'll try to put the book as we read it into the RAM, and that would be a lot. Whatevs. So here, I'm just going to read line by line because I find reading line by line to be chill. So I'm going to do while the line that we've pulled is not null. So the danger is if we try to read an empty file, we could run into the case where that line was null, right? So what we're going to do is as long as the line isn't empty, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to do two things. And the first thing is going to be we're going to print out the line that we're looking at. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to advance to the next line. Okay, so now here we're going to say success, and we're going to say the book was read from a file. Okay, so let's run this. We've got an issue here that our read book is telling us that it wants an argument. So the argument that it wants is a string called contents. I didn't need that. That was my issue. I shouldn't have had that. Okay, so I'm going to remove that. That was because I copy and pasted the other method. So now here we're going to run this, and we should see our book that came out of book.txt and showed up here in the console. So let me show you some errors that can happen. If we don't write the book and the book file just doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and delete that. Notice I turned safe delete off there. So now what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and it's going to generate a random book. It's going to store it in the book variable. Nothing's going to happen with that because we turned off the writing. Then we're going to try to read from a book.txt file that doesn't exist. So that's going to kick an input-output exception. It's going to kick a file not found input-output exception. And then we're going to print a stack trace for that, and then we're going to return, and that's going to keep us from printing this thing about the file. So there's our stack trace. An interesting thing that's happening here is that is not actually closing this. So we could put down here at the bottom program end. When we hit run, a lot of the time when we get an error, right, when we see an exception, that exception stops the program. In this case, that exception is not stopping the program. That exception is not stopping the program because it's in a catch, right? That exception got caught, we printed its stack trace, and then we went on to the rest of the program, right? We got down here. This is actually a pretty cool thing. Handling exceptions is really neat. I think we've got that. So let's turn it back on and let's see our issue with cranking this to its full power. So the full power is I want to do 80 characters on a line, and in a book I want to do 16,400 characters, or 16,400 lines, each with 80 characters. Now I'm going to hit run here, and it's going to start running. Now, while this thing is running, I'm going to explain to you what the issue is. So what the issue is as we try to generate our random book, we're going in here and we're dealing with a string called book. Now, strings are what are called an immutable variable type. When I do plus equals to a string, what happens is it actually creates a copy in memory of the string that I've got with the extra space. So the string that I've got with the extra space that's going to be added to the end for the thing I'm trying to add to it, which in this case is a single ass character. So it makes a whole copy, it adds a single character, and then it goes through the loop. So remember, it's adding a single character each time. So every time it's doing this, it's copying this giant ass string, right? That string keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the end, right, that string has 16,400 times 81, because there's 81 characters on a line. There's the 80 actual characters, and then there's the line, or the new line character at the end. So there's 81 characters on every single line. And so at the end here, we've got 16,400 times 81, maybe minus 1, right, for our last character. And we're copying that entire string to add the last character. Now, that's clearly taking fucking forever. So this was not a good way to do this. Using the buffered reader and writer sped this up some. But most of our problem here is with the fact that we're using a string here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little efficiency improvement. And I'm just going to write it as we're going, and maybe this thing will finish by the time we're done. So the improvement here is we're going to use what's called a string builder. Oh, hey, it finally finished. What was that? Like 3 minutes or something. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead here and I'm gonna swap this out. So I'm gonna do a couple of things. The first thing I'm gonna do is right here, right before I create the book, I'm gonna make an integer that I'm gonna call estimated size. And this is gonna give me I'm gonna make a string builder object, which is essentially like an array list for a string. In this case, it's actually like a big empty character array. So what I'm going to do is I'm making this estimated size. And the way we're going to make this estimated size is we're going to take the number of characters per line. We're going to add 1 to that for the new line at the end. And then we're going to multiply by lines per book. So that's getting us a big number that's 81 times 16,400 in the default case. And then here, we're going to make a string builder called book. And this is going to be a new string builder, and I need to give it a starting size, so I'm going to just pass it estimated size to start with. Now we have 2 issues. These 2 are both how we were adding things to it. So remember, I was just concatenating, right? I was doing plus equals, that's concatenation. So we're going to improve that by doing dot append. And the thing I want to append is the character that I picked. And then down here, instead of adding new lines, we're going to do this same append. So I'm just going to snag this. I'm going to paste that there. So instead of concatenating, we're appending. And then here, when we go to return our string, this is a string builder object. So I need to turn that into a string. And luckily, there's a toString method in that object. So this is same basic idea, except now I'm using a string builder instead of a string. So now I'm going to hit run. And it instantly finishes. Because we aren't copying that stupid string every time, we kind of pre-made a spot to store all those letters, and then we just fill them in one at a time. Okay. We've got a little, we're a little under-documented here, and we've got our overloaded method to put in. So I'm going to put this overloaded method in. This is telling me that it's never used. That's fine. So I'm going to go up here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say here, instead of passing those 2 numbers on, let's just delete them. So now it's calling the overloaded one that doesn't have any arguments. And then that one is defining those two arguments and passing them to the other one. So this ought to work exactly the same way. Great, works exactly the same way. If we wanted to, we could make another overloaded one that included a string that was our possible characters, and then we'd actually just go ahead and copy this one into the guts of that, and then in here we'd call that one. Hope that's kind of clear. Maybe as an exercise, if you feel like it, see if you could get that to work. Okay. In order to do a little bit better job of documenting here, we really should go ahead and make some Java docs. So here we'd go ahead and make Java docs, right? If we're doing a good job with this, we should add a little bit of error checking. And so our error checking should be something like, if characters per line is less than or equal to 0, we should do some kind of a throwing. So we should throw a new illegal argument exception and say number of characters per line must be strictly positive. Okay, and we should also do that for the lines per book and the number of lines in the book must be strictly positive. And then here we should add a at throws. So here we should add at throws. And this would be an illegal argument exception. And I have this crap built over here, so I'm just going to grab it from my notes so you don't have to watch me type a bunch of shit. Okay, so that's one Java doc here. That's for our most complicated function, the random book function. We could probably add a Java doc for this one. That one should include what those defaults are. Then we could add Java docs for read book and write book. I'm not going to do that right now because I think this video is long enough. Thank you guys for watching. Much appreciated. Hope this was a cool example. Oh, we could do one thing here while we're at it. Let's just go through and search this for a word. I'm going to search this for my name because it's fun. That's not interesting. That's not interesting. That's not interesting. That one's not interesting. Boring, 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 boring. Jobbik. Okay. That's not super interesting. That one's not interesting. Everyone's... Oh, wait. No, that's not interesting. Every once in a while, you'll find one that's kind of fun. So I encourage you to play with this a little bit. Pick your favorite word, make a few books, and search through them. See if you find something funny. If you do, throw it in the Discord or throw it in the comments. It's entertaining at the very least. It does happen every once in a while that there will be... That one's 2 Joes on a line. That's cool. Yeah, there can be cool stuff in here. I've done this a few times, and I've seen a couple funny ones, but it's been a bit, and I'm not seeing one in here. So I'm going to call it a day on this. Thanks, guys. I will catch you on the next one.